Of being attacked and all kinds of things being written about him, that the police had confiscated his computer and there were images of child pornography. Totally untrue. Those kind of things that were thrown at him over a long period of time. Don't forget that he was attacked by the British media as soon as his status, his Arguido status, was put in place. So the nightmare continues for him. This is the end, if you like, of the battle with the British media, because obviously they attacked him for months, and at least now he's got some compensation.
At the center of the Madeleine McCann case are 9 individuals whose actions, relationships, and statements form the bedrock of this enduring mystery, known as the Tapas 9 because they dined together each evening at the Ocean Club's tapas restaurant. Understanding the dynamics within this group is essential to grasping the complexities of the case. The group was comprised of 4 couples and one of their parents. Gerry and Kate McCann are the parents of Madeleine. Both are doctors. Gerry, a consultant cardiologist, and Kate, a former GP. By many accounts, Gerry possessed an assertive character and often took the lead in the group's decision-making. He appeared acutely aware of public perception, a trait that became prominent both during the holiday and in the tragic aftermath. Kate, often described as quieter and more reserved, became the global face of a mother's grief. Then there are David and Fiona Payne. David, also a doctor, is perhaps one of the more controversial figures in the group. His name features in various testimonies that highlight apparent contradictions and behaviors that have since drawn scrutiny. He was a close friend of the McCanns and considered a staunch ally of Gerry. His wife, Fiona, is generally seen as supportive but less central to the main narrative, primarily acting as a witness who corroborated her husband's version of events. Matthew and Rachel Oldfield form another part of this circle. Another doctor, Matthew, plays a significant part in the timeline of the evening Madeleine went missing. His wife, Rachel, a recruitment consultant, is typically described as quiet. While they may seem less prominent, their accounts are crucial in supporting the group's collective alibi. Next is Russell O'Brien and Jane Tanner. Russell, a doctor, remains a relatively peripheral figure, though he does feature at several key moments. Jane Tanner, however, became a pivotal witness. Her claim of seeing a man carrying a child near the McCann's apartment that night heavily influenced the initial direction of the investigation. Lastly, Diane Webster, as Fiona Payne's mother, was the only member of the older generation in the group. While not involved in the core dynamics, her calm, yet sometimes inconsistent recollections made her an unexpected witness. The interactions between these 9 people created a subtle power structure that seemed to shape their actions. Gerry McCann appeared to be at its core. Piecing together various accounts, his leadership style could be perceived as assertive, guiding the group towards a unified narrative and directing what was said both publicly and privately. David Payne held a uniquely complicated role. While seemingly Gerry's closest confidant, his own behavior, particularly a visit to apartment 5A and certain actions described in testimonies, drew uncomfortable attention. His role appears twofold: a loyal supporter for Gerry and a critical component in maintaining the consistency of their collective timeline. The remaining couples, the Oldfields and O'Briens, played an essential, if less central, role. Their testimonies often aligned in ways that suggested a coordinated account, which served to validate the group's version of events. This, by extension, may have shielded the more central figures from deeper scrutiny. Throughout the investigation, a recurring theme emerged regarding Gerry McCann's apparent detachment from hands-on parenting during the holiday. Several testimonies suggest he prioritized socializing and sporting activities, such as tennis, over spending time with his children. One pointed observation from the case files highlights an instance where Gerry reportedly refused to interrupt his tennis game to help Kate, instead sending David Payne to check on her. The commentary suggests a man who viewed his personal leisure as a priority. This sentiment is echoed in another statement, which noted how little time the parents spent with the children, remarking that the half hour at the playground before bed was their main fun time, a period Gerry had booked for a tennis lesson, leaving Kate to manage the children alone. This pattern of detached parenting prompts critical questions about the couple's mindset and decision-making at the time. Furthermore, there are indications of subtle tensions beneath the group's polite exterior. Some accounts suggest that David Payne and Matthew Oldfield may have sympathized with Kate's position under Gerry's influential personality, with Payne even noted for occasionally mocking Gerry's treatment of his wife. Despite these undercurrents, the group consistently closed ranks when questioned by authorities. They presented a unified front, downplaying any internal disagreements and reaffirming one another's accounts. This suggests a deliberate strategy to maintain cohesion, perhaps fueled by a shared fear of legal or social consequences. What at first glance appears to be a group of friends on holiday starts to look more like a carefully managed alliance, held together by a tacit agreement to protect their collective narrative. Behind the holiday photos and tearful press conferences lay a network of relationships and allegiances that continue to obscure the truth of what happened in apartment 5A. These complex dynamics become particularly crucial when examining the events of that evening, especially within the highly contested 30-minute window between approximately 6:30 p.m. and 7:00 p.m. On May 3, 2007, a 30-minute window between approximately 6:30 p.m. and 7:00 p.m. became a focal point of the Madeleine McCann case. This period, now often referred to by researchers as the Payne visit window, has drawn relentless scrutiny due to the conflicting statements made by the key individuals involved. These contradictions revolve around whether David Payne, one of the members of the Tapas 9 group, visited the McCann's apartment 5A, that evening, and where exactly each group member was during that crucial half hour. According to Kate McCann, she returned to their apartment around 5:40 p.m. that evening, after an afternoon at the beach, because Madeleine was tired. Kate and Gerry then bathed the children before Gerry left for a prearranged tennis session around 6:00 p.m. Kate stated that while she was showering at approximately 6:30 p.m., David Payne knocked on their patio door. In her testimony, she claimed that Payne did not enter the apartment and that he simply asked if she needed help with taking the children to the recreation area. She described his visit as lasting no more than 30 seconds. Gerry McCann's testimony appears to corroborate this narrative, but with significant variations. He claimed that while playing tennis around 6:30 p.m., David Payne approached him and asked whether he intended to continue playing. Gerry told Payne he was unsure because Kate might need help with the children. He stated that Payne then offered to check on Kate and left the tennis courts, returning minutes later to confirm that everything was fine. David Payne's own statement supports this general timeline, but introduces additional ambiguity. Payne claimed that he visited the tennis courts, spoke with Gerry, and then went to check on Kate at Gerry's suggestion. He recalled entering the McCann's apartment via the patio doors and seeing the children already bathed and in their pajamas. He described them as looking immaculate and mentioned that he had a brief conversation with Kate before leaving to resume playing tennis. While this trio of accounts may initially seem aligned, the situation becomes far murkier when we consider the statements of the other Tapas 9 members. Fiona Payne, David's wife, testified that she and her mother, Diane Webster, were at the beach until around 6:15 p.m. before heading to the tennis courts. According to her, they remained at the courts until approximately 7:00 p.m., before returning to their apartment, where David joined them around 10 minutes later to assist with bathing their children. Notably, she made no mention of David leaving the courts to visit the McCanns during this time frame. Diane Webster's statement closely mirrors Fiona's, affirming that they stayed at the tennis courts until around 7:00 p.m. and returned to the apartment shortly afterward. She also stated that David arrived roughly 10 minutes later to help with the children, again omitting any mention of his visit to apartment 5A. Matthew Oldfield added another layer of inconsistency. He stated that he, along with David Payne and Russell O'Brien, attended a men's social tennis session starting around 6:00 p.m. and lasting until approximately 7:00 p.m. Matthew specifically mentioned that Gerry McCann was already at the courts when they arrived. He did not recall David Payne leaving the courts at any point during that time frame. Jane Tanner's account introduces even more complexity. She testified that David, Matthew, and Russell left the beach early to attend the tennis session. She stated that she and other women, along with the children, arrived at the tennis courts around 6:20 p.m. and saw all the men, including Gerry, already on the court. Jane noted that she believed Kate was back at the apartment putting the children to bed during this time, but she made no mention of seeing David leave the courts. Rachel Oldfield echoed Jane's account, saying that the men had left the beach around 6:30 p.m. for tennis, and that the women and children followed shortly afterward. She estimated their arrival at the courts to be around 7:00 p.m., just as the men were finishing up their session. Again, there was no reference to David Payne visiting apartment 5A. Russell O'Brien added yet another perspective, stating that he arrived at the tennis courts with Matthew around 6:00 p.m. and believed that David Payne had briefly visited the apartment before joining them. However, he also described playing tennis with David until around 7:30 p.m., leaving questions about whether Payne had enough time to visit apartment 5A unnoticed. These conflicting testimonies raised several critical questions. Who was really at the tennis courts during that half hour? Did David Payne actually visit the McCann's apartment, as claimed by Kate, Gerry, and David himself? Or did he remain at the courts throughout the entire period, as suggested by nearly every other witness? The inconsistencies extend beyond minor memory lapses. They strike at the very heart of the case's timeline. This confusion points to the deeper complexities of the case, whether due to faulty memories, intentional omissions, or coordinated narratives. The testimonies surrounding David Payne's alleged visit to apartment 5A remain among the most contested and enigmatic elements of the Madeleine McCann investigation. A deep analysis of the witness testimonies reveals not only glaring contradictions, but also potential signs of carefully coordinated statements. A close reading of the testimonies exposes discrepancies that go beyond normal memory lapses and raise serious questions about possible collaboration in crafting a unified story. At the heart of the confusion is the timeline offered by Kate McCann, Gerry McCann, and David Payne himself. Each of these three individuals describes the supposed visit in similar terms. Yet, despite the similarity in their testimonies, the timing details within these three accounts subtly diverge. David's recollection, however, is vague and peppered with uncertainty, as he repeatedly uses ambiguous language. The troubling aspect of these accounts lies not just in their minor timing inconsistencies, but in the conspicuous absence of corroboration from every other member of their social circle. Fiona Payne, Diane Webster, Matthew Oldfield, Jane Tanner, Russell O'Brien, and Rachel Oldfield all failed to mention David Payne leaving the tennis courts or visiting the McCann's apartment. This is not a trivial omission. Given that the group was known for meticulously monitoring each other's movements during the holiday, it is highly suspicious that an event described as casually routine by 3 people could go completely unnoticed by the rest. Furthermore, these same witnesses provide consistent recollections that directly contradict the core trio's narrative. This sharp split in the testimonies creates an unusual dynamic. Only Kate, Gerry, and David recall the visit, while everyone else either ignores it or denies its plausibility. Such a divide raises the possibility that some testimonies may have been intentionally constructed to reinforce a specific narrative. In forensic psychology, this behavior is often characterized as statement convergence, where individuals subtly align their stories to protect themselves or others. The signs of such convergence are evident in the way Gerry, Kate, and David all emphasize their consistency in small, seemingly innocuous details about the visit. Even more telling is the contrast between the spontaneity of the other witnesses' statements and the rehearsed tone of the core trio's recollections. The remaining Tapas 9 members recall the evening in a more fragmented, casual manner, admitting to memory gaps and uncertainties. In contrast, the McCanns and David Payne present their accounts with striking clarity on specific points, despite the otherwise stressful and chaotic nature of the evening. To better understand these contradictions, reconstructing the timeline from their testimonies is essential. Around 5:40 p.m., Kate and Gerry return to apartment 5A after the beach. By 6 o'clock p.m., Gerry leaves for his tennis session. From around 6:15 p.m. onwards, Fiona, Diane, and several other members of the group headed to the tennis courts, where they said they remained until approximately 7 o'clock p.m. Between 6:30 p.m. and 7 o'clock p.m., David Payne was said to have gone to the McCann apartment. According to Kate, Gerry, and David, this particular half hour holds importance. Yet other members of the group, outside of these 3, placed David Payne consistently at the courts during this time. Their accounts not only overlap but reinforce each other, suggesting they shared the same perception of his presence there. This, however, leaves a gap in the timeline, an unverified period where clarity is missing. If David Payne did leave the courts for a short visit, why was this not mentioned by anyone else? Was it genuinely unnoticed, or was it left out deliberately to avoid drawing attention to what might have happened during that time? Additionally, some members of the group referred to activities or actions that appeared to conveniently support the McCann's version of events in other areas. Despite these contradictions, the selective alignment of certain details while disregarding others suggests the possibility of informal coordination. This does not necessarily mean deliberate dishonesty, but it could point to a subconscious attempt to preserve group harmony and avoid conflict. The lack of clarity about David Payne's exact movements during this crucial period leaves open the possibility that some parts of the narrative may have been shaped or adjusted afterwards to fit a preferred version of events. Whether this was done with harmful intent or simply as a way to simplify the investigation is uncertain. Still, what stands out is that the testimonies of Kate, Gerry, and David remain isolated, not only because they are the only ones to mention the visit, but also because their consistency feels more constructed than natural. In contrast, the rest of the group's accounts, though not perfect, have a more spontaneous and believable flow. This difference highlights an important weakness in the case: the presence of selective memory gaps and recollections that appear coordinated, which have so far prevented a clear and agreed-upon timeline from emerging. The absence of consensus on such a fundamental point indicates that the truth of what occurred in apartment 5A during this key period is still hidden, obscured by conflicting testimonies and unanswered questions about who truly remembers what. Among the many troubling aspects of the Madeleine McCann investigation, one of the most significant remains the Gaspar statement. This witness testimony, kept in the files for years, contains an unsettling account of David Payne's behavior during a previous holiday. It raises questions not only about the group's dynamics, but also about deeper psychological concerns. The statement comes from Dr. Katerina Gaspar, a medical professional who, along with her husband, had spent time on holiday with the McCanns in the past. In her account, Dr. Gaspar recalls a disturbing memory from that trip. One evening, while the adults sat together on a patio, she witnessed David Payne make a highly inappropriate and provocative gesture during a conversation with Gerry McCann about Madeleine. According to her testimony, Payne placed one of his fingers in his mouth, mimicking a sucking action, while using his other hand to circle his chest in a suggestive manner over his clothing. She recalled being shocked and unsettled by this, noting that it was not the type of behavior any adult should display, especially in the company of others. Dr. Gaspar also remembered another occasion during the same holiday when Payne repeated the same gesture, this time while speaking about his own daughter, Lily. Although she could not recall the exact details of the second conversation, the memory of the gesture stayed vivid in her mind. In both cases, the behavior was unmistakably suggestive. The Gaspar statement raises serious concerns about David Payne's judgment and intentions. It also casts a shadow over Gerry McCann's reaction, or more accurately, his lack of reaction. Dr. Gaspar noted that Gerry did not challenge Payne or stop him, and the group simply paused briefly before continuing their conversation as though nothing unusual had occurred. This lack of response is itself troubling. Given the nature of the gesture, one might expect a parent, particularly the father of the child being referenced, to react with discomfort or objection. Yet Gerry appeared unbothered, or at least unwilling to confront Payne in front of others. This raises key questions. Why was there silence from the group? Why did no one else at the table, apart from Dr. Gaspar, seem to react? Was this due to misplaced politeness, a desire to avoid conflict, or something more serious? Or the Gaspar statement suggests deeper problems within the group, known as the Tapas Nine. It implies that either boundaries for acceptable behavior were worryingly lax, or that there was a collective reluctance to acknowledge or confront inappropriate conduct. Both explanations are concerning. Equally significant is the contrast between this testimony and David Payne's later words when asked by police to describe Madeleine. Speaking to Detective Constable Messiah, Payne described Madeleine in terms that many have found unsettling. He called her a very striking, beautiful child, even describing her as doll-like. He repeatedly focused on her appearance, noting her blonde hair, petite build, and her lively, bubbly nature. He emphasized her charm and uniqueness, referring to her as Gerry and Kate's pride and joy. He also mentioned her distinctive iris defect, but quickly returned to her physical features and personality, again stressing her beauty. What stands out in this statement is Payne's repeated focus on Madeleine's appearance. While it is not unusual to describe a missing child as beautiful or lively, the level of detail and repetition went further than many observers felt comfortable with. Combined with the behavior described in the Gaspar statement, this emphasis raises questions about Payne's attitude. Was he simply socially awkward, as some have argued, or was there something more concerning beneath the surface? From a psychological perspective, Payne's behavior in the Gaspar account and his words to police share similar themes: an unusual focus on physical attributes and a failure to observe normal boundaries. This raises further questions. Was Payne's detailed description motivated by genuine concern or by something less innocent? It also casts Gerry McCann's silence into sharper focus. Was he merely avoiding confrontation with a friend, or does his lack of response suggest a normalization of such behavior within the group? The fact that no one else reacted supports the idea of either desensitization or collective reluctance to acknowledge what was happening. It is essential to consider these questions carefully without making accusations unsupported by evidence. Nonetheless, the Gaspar statement is significant and cannot simply be dismissed. It offers a rare glimpse into group dynamics that have often been overlooked. The fact that it remained in case files for years before becoming widely known also raises questions about whether parts of the investigation were handled thoroughly. In the broader context of the Madeleine McCann case, the Gaspar statement is not a minor detail. It highlights behavioral concerns that may be relevant to understanding events. Whether David Payne was directly involved in Madeleine's disappearance remains unproven. However, his behavior, as described, raises legitimate questions about his character and his influence within the group. The Gaspar statement forces us to reflect on uncomfortable issues. How should society respond to behavior that crosses lines of propriety? At what point does silence become complicity? And could important clues about Madeleine McCann's fate have been hidden in plain sight, overlooked due to politeness or group loyalty? As the case continues to fascinate and trouble the public, the Gaspar statement remains one of its most unsettling elements, a reminder that the hardest truths are often those least acknowledged. One of the most persistent theories surrounding Madeleine's disappearance involves what is referred to as the 49-minute gap. This period between 8:30 p.m. and 9:20 p.m. on 3rd May 2007 has drawn extensive debate because it represents a stretch of time when the actions of key individuals were either unaccounted for or explained ambiguously. Supporters of this theory argue that the interval would have been long enough for actions to take place that might have concealed what had happened. The uncertainty surrounding this missing period continues to drive speculation and remains one of the most debated aspects of the case. The theory is stark in its simplicity. A span of 49 minutes would have been sufficient time for individuals familiar with the resort's layout to discreetly move or hide a small child without being noticed. During this period, the group of friends known as the Tapas 9 appeared to have taken a flexible approach to checking on their children, with some checks seemingly overlapping and others not clearly recorded. A central element of this line of thought is the belief that the search immediately following Madeleine's reported disappearance was deeply flawed. The McCanns and resort staff initially assumed she had either wandered away or been taken by an outsider. This assumption directed the search efforts towards open spaces, nearby streets, and surrounding areas, all under the belief that they were looking for a child still alive. Such a presumption carried critical consequences. No one appears to have considered thoroughly checking luggage, large bags, or other items that might have been used to discreetly transport a child. Reports indicate that guests were able to move freely with their belongings without close inspection. This oversight left a significant blind spot at precisely the time when every avenue should have been considered. Adding to this concern is the recurring mention of a large sports or kit bag linked to the McCanns and their circle of friends. Several witnesses referred to seeing such a bag during the holiday, yet there is little indication that it was ever examined closely in the immediate aftermath. Critics argue that this omission is troubling, particularly since such a bag could easily have been used in ways that investigators did not initially anticipate. Suspicion increased further when specialist dogs, trained to detect scents associated with death, alerted to various locations and objects connected to the McCanns. Most notably, they signaled in relation to a rental car the couple used weeks after Madeleine went missing, and also to some items of Kate McCann's clothing. The involvement of the hire car is especially striking. Although obtained long after the disappearance, the fact that the dogs responded to it prompted speculation that Madeleine may have been temporarily hidden and later moved in the vehicle. The McCanns firmly denied this, suggesting the reactions could have been caused by indirect transfer or contamination from other objects. Yet, doubts linger because of the dog's consistency and track record in other investigations. Kate's clothing also raises difficult questions, as the same dogs repeatedly signal towards specific items. Some suggest innocent explanations such as cross-contamination, but others see this as harder to dismiss. Taken together, these elements form a troubling picture. The 49-minute period offered an opportunity for actions to be taken without immediate scrutiny, particularly as the initial search was narrow in focus and poorly supervised. The absence of checks on personal belongings, alongside the later findings involving the dogs, has led many to argue that both opportunity and means existed for concealment and movement. Although unproven, the theory continues to weigh heavily on the case, reminding us of the unanswered questions that have shaped the investigation. Within this framework, another pressing issue emerges: motive. If one accepts the possibility that Madeleine's disappearance was not due to an outsider, but instead linked to events within the group, the question becomes, what might have prompted such an extreme response? One often discussed idea is that of an accident. There has been long-standing speculation that Madeleine may have been given a sedative to ensure she and her siblings remained asleep while the adults socialized at the tapas restaurant. If true, an error in dosage or an unexpected reaction could have had tragic consequences. Another suggestion is that Madeleine may have suffered a fall or injury while left unattended. For Gerry and Kate McCann, both medical professionals, the stakes would have been immense. They were acutely aware of the legal and ethical implications of their actions. Their personal history added another dimension: years of struggling with infertility before conceiving their children through IVF. The prospect of losing Madeleine and potentially facing the removal of their other children would have been devastating. Beyond personal loss, there was also the looming threat of professional disgrace and financial ruin if accusations of negligence were made public. In such circumstances, some argue, individuals might be pushed towards desperate choices. Under this scenario, the theory becomes even more unsettling when considering the possibility of group involvement. The Tapas Nine, a tightly bonded group of friends, may have either actively helped or silently allowed steps to be taken to conceal what had happened. With close social and professional ties, it is conceivable that some felt protecting the McCanns also protected themselves. How such concealment might have been carried out is another difficult question. One frequently suggested idea is that Madeleine could have been carried out disguised as a sleeping child during the 49-minute period or later that night, allowing her to be hidden temporarily without arousing suspicion. In the days and weeks that followed, it is theorized that a rental vehicle could have been used to move her elsewhere once media and police attention began to lessen. The dog's alerts to the car and certain belongings are seen by some as supporting this possibility, though it remains circumstantial. At its heart, this theory rests on the convergence of high personal stakes and the existence of opportunity. Fear of losing their children, their reputations, and their livelihoods could have driven the McCanns into unthinkable decisions. The solidarity of their close friends may have provided both justification and practical support to maintain the cover. Although unproven, this scenario remains widely debated, illustrating how fear, shame, and loyalty can push ordinary people into extraordinary and tragic circumstances. Another significant angle is the dynamic of the Tapas Nine themselves. This group appeared to act with remarkable unity during the aftermath of Madeleine's disappearance. Some observers have asked whether their conduct suggested an unspoken pact to hold to a particular narrative. A closer look at their police statements reveals an unusual degree of alignment, even in apparently minor or irrelevant details. Psychologists note that when multiple witnesses independently provide the same unnecessary information, it can suggest prior discussion or rehearsal. In this case, members of the group repeatedly highlighted identical aspects of their routine, such as the order of dinner events or precise timing of their checks. Such consistency, especially under intense emotional strain, is highly unusual. Few people recall exact timings with such precision in stressful circumstances. This level of uniformity raises the possibility that the group consciously or unconsciously coordinated their stories to appear consistent. Group psychology offers an important lens through which to consider why events may have unfolded in this way. A primary factor is self-preservation. Each member of the Tapas Nine had much to lose if the investigation were to move towards allegations of neglect or worse. By presenting a consistent account, they could collectively shield themselves from scrutiny and possible legal consequences. Another element is the instinct to protect friends, which is particularly powerful in groups linked not only by social bonds, but also by professional reputations, as was the case here. Several of the group were doctors, bound together not only by friendship, but by careers that could have been tarnished if one of them fell under suspicion. In such circumstances, there is often a strong, though unspoken, drive to unite and protect one another. Fear of the unknown also likely influenced their choices. The prospect of facing police interrogation, intense media attention, or even charges could have encouraged the group to adopt a strategy of strict consistency. Once they realized the extraordinary level of attention the case had drawn, it would have been extremely difficult to alter their original story without undermining their own credibility or inviting further suspicion. Key questions linger about whether there was a deeper shared knowledge within the group. For example, why did Gerry McCann remain silent in the face of David Payne's alleged inappropriate behavior, as described in the Gaspar statement? According to Dr. Katerina Gaspar, Payne's gestures during conversations involving children should have provoked discomfort, or at least visible disapproval. Yet Gerry did not react at all. This silence, whether born of shock, a desire to avoid confrontation, or something more troubling, remains difficult to explain. Equally puzzling is the group's uniform response about David Payne's reported visit to apartment 5A. Only Gerry, Kate, and David himself referred to it, while all others either failed to notice it or left it out entirely. Considering their close proximity and their habit of referencing each other's movements, it is difficult to believe such a visit could have gone unnoticed by everyone else. This striking absence suggests two possibilities. Either the group collectively chose to omit it to avoid complications, or they had previously discussed the matter and agreed to exclude it from most accounts. Both possibilities point towards a shared understanding, if not an explicit agreement, to control the narrative. This leads to the broader question of whether the group as a whole was aware of crucial information from the outset. Was there a collective knowledge of what truly happened that night, leading to a deliberate or unconscious effort to protect themselves and one another? Or did they simply fall into a pattern of mutual protection rooted in fear and loyalty? Though conclusive answers remain elusive, the consistent alignment of testimonies, the lack of contradictions within key accounts, and the unanswered questions about David Payne's behavior and movements all suggest that the Tapas Nine may have operated as more than just a group of holidaying friends. They may have acted as a unified front, bound together in ways that hint at shared secrets. To understand their behavior more fully, it is useful to consider forensic psychology. The phenomenon of collective alignment in testimonies can often be explained by well-documented psychological mechanisms in high-pressure crises. Groupthink, a concept identified by psychologist Irving Janis, is especially relevant here. It describes how cohesive groups may unconsciously suppress disagreement to maintain harmony. In situations where legal risk, media scrutiny, and the threat of public disgrace are pressing, Individuals within a close-knit group may instinctively align their memories and statements, motivated not just by fear, but also by a need to protect the group's integrity and reduce emotional strain. In the case of the Tapas 9, this could have manifested as a shared tendency to downplay or omit awkward details. The selective omission of David Payne's alleged visit to apartment 5A, for example, may not have been a calculated deception, but a psychological defense, avoiding acknowledgement of information that threatened group cohesion. Forensic psychologists have also observed that memory conformity is common in group contexts, particularly following stressful events. Research has shown that individuals often unconsciously absorb details from others' accounts, blending them into their own recollections to form a coherent but potentially inaccurate version of events. In such situations, group members may genuinely believe their harmonized stories, even when these diverge from reality. The Tapas 9's strong social and professional ties likely intensified their instinct to present a united front. As both friends and colleagues, their identities were intertwined in ways that made collective protection almost instinctive. Experts such as Dr. Lawrence Allison, professor of forensic psychology at the University of Liverpool, note that this behavior is not unusual in high-pressure investigations. He explains that witnesses may unconsciously align their stories to reduce inner conflict and collective anxiety, creating shared narratives that feel emotionally safer. This helps to explain how the Tapas 9 could produce consistent, yet at times conflicting testimonies. While some interpret this as evidence of deliberate collusion, psychological frameworks, such as groupthink, memory conformity, and emotional self-protection, also offer plausible explanations. The aftermath of Madeleine McCann's disappearance has also been shaped by contentious developments that fueled debate and deepened the mystery. One of the most polarizing issues concerns the handling of forensic evidence, particularly the findings of specialist dogs trained to detect traces of blood and scents associated with death. These dogs searched locations linked to the case, including the apartment where Madeleine was last seen and a hire car obtained by the McCanns weeks later. They alerted in several places, including areas inside apartment 5A, certain items of clothing, and the rental vehicle. Despite the dog's strong record in other investigations, their findings were largely minimized by both British and Portuguese authorities. Critics argue that this downplaying was a major misstep. Instead of prompting a more targeted inquiry, the evidence was often treated as inconclusive or unreliable. This sidelining of potentially important forensic leads has become one of the most criticized aspects of the investigation, with accusations of bias and incompetence. The early police response also drew serious concerns. Reports suggest the investigation's first stages were marked by poor coordination, inadequate search protocols, and a reluctance to treat the disappearance with the urgency it demanded. Witnesses described confusion in the hours that followed, with resort staff and guests leading much of the search while police were slow to act. There appeared to be no coherent strategy, with focus shifting erratically from one suspect to another, without a firm evidential basis. This included the high-profile targeting of Robert Murat, a local resident whose life was disrupted by intense suspicion and media coverage before he was eventually cleared. The apparent randomness of these shifts suggested a reactive rather than structured investigation. At the same time, the McCanns demonstrated remarkable control of their public image. Almost from the outset, they enlisted public relations professionals to shape how the story was presented. Through carefully managed press appearances, selective interviews, and a strong online presence, they were able to influence much of the coverage in their favor. To fully understand the case, it is important to consider how the McCanns' deliberate media strategy influenced public perception. From the earliest days, they showed acute awareness of the media's ability to define the narrative. They employed calculated measures, including hiring experienced advisors in crisis management, to frame their story and maintain control over the wider discourse. These advisors carefully managed press appearances, ensured consistent messaging in interviews, and tightly controlled media access to the family. The McCanns also launched an official website and made use of social media to reinforce their image as grieving parents while promoting their campaign to find Madeleine. A central feature of this strategy was the use of emotionally powerful imagery, including family photographs and videos of Madeleine, combined with appeals that resonated with parental fears. The campaign repeatedly underlined their role as devoted and capable parents facing an unimaginable ordeal, which in turn subtly diverted attention away from closer scrutiny of their own actions. Another significant tactic involved directing the narrative towards the idea of an external abduction. Through press conferences and public statements, the McCanns and their representatives consistently emphasized this theory, despite the lack of definitive evidence to support it. This approach helped maintain public sympathy, while also shifting focus away from contradictions in witness accounts and early forensic results. They also used their platform to challenge unfavorable narratives by openly criticizing the Portuguese police and portraying the investigation as flawed and unjust, which successfully rallied British media and much of the public to their side. By presenting themselves as victims of both a crime and a poorly handled inquiry, they kept attention firmly on the search for Madeleine while deflecting criticism. Over time, this deliberate media strategy contributed to a sharply divided public. Supporters saw the McCanns as courageous parents fighting against official indifference, while critics questioned their sincerity and pointed to the inconsistencies in their statements. In a wider sense, the McCann case became a striking example of how media management can profoundly influence public opinion in high-profile investigations, showing the risks of allowing press narratives to outweigh forensic evidence and measured inquiry. This was not merely about limiting damage. It allowed the McCanns to emphasize their version of events, minimize awkward details, and portray themselves as victims of both a tragic disappearance and an inept investigation. While many sympathized, others regarded this level of image control with suspicion, interpreting it as an attempt to obscure uncomfortable truths. The combination of investigative missteps and skillful media management created fertile ground for confusion and speculation. The public conversation became increasingly polarized, with some convinced of the McCanns' innocence and others convinced that they and their friends had concealed the truth, pointing to overlooked forensic findings and contradictions in testimony. These unresolved tensions helped the case descend into doubt and speculation, with both the Portuguese and later the British investigations hindered by legal complications, diplomatic sensitivities, and a lack of new evidence. As the years passed, the prospect of a clear resolution steadily diminished. In the wider context of missing persons cases, the McCann investigation has become symbolic of the dangers of mishandled evidence, weak initial responses, and the ability of media to shape outcomes. It serves as a cautionary tale about the consequences of prioritizing public relations over thorough investigation, and how the search for truth can be derailed by competing agendas.
To this day, Madeleine's fate remains unknown, and the case continues to spark debate and division. While some hope for a breakthrough, others believe the most crucial questions were raised long ago and deliberately left unanswered. As the many layers of this case are examined, one truth remains clear. It is a story filled with contradictions, troubling behavior, and unanswered questions. Despite the passage of time, it continues to provoke debate, not only because of its tragic core, but because of the inconsistencies that overshadow every stage of the investigation. At the center of this confusion are the conflicting witness accounts, particularly those from the Tapas 9. From disagreements about David Payne's reported visit to apartment 5A, to inconsistent recollections about who was at the tennis courts and at what time, the testimonies are marked by contradictions. Kate and Gerry McCann, along with David Payne, maintained that Payne visited apartment 5A around 6:30 p.m. to check on Kate and the children, while other members of the group either omitted this entirely or insisted he stayed at the courts. Likewise, accounts of the evening's routine varied on details, ranging from when the group left the beach to the exact order of child-checking intervals. Interestingly, while some testimonies differed widely, others were curiously uniform on minor, non-essential details, suggesting the possibility of coordinated accounts. This alignment is unusual given the natural fallibility of memory under stress. The contradictions were not confined to small lapses, but touched on pivotal moments that could hold the key to what really occurred. Beyond conflicting accounts, the conduct of several individuals added further concerns. David Payne's actions, as described in the Gaspar statement, remain highly unsettling, and his later police interview about Madeleine raised further questions due to his repetitive and oddly specific focus on her appearance. Gerry McCann's lack of visible reaction to Payne's behavior during their previous holiday also continues to puzzle observers. Added to this is the questionable treatment of forensic evidence. Specialist dogs alerted to several significant locations, including apartment 5A, items of Kate McCann's clothing, and the rental car obtained by the family weeks after Madeleine's disappearance. Rather than triggering deeper investigation, these alerts were largely dismissed or explained away, despite the proven reliability of such dogs in other cases. Even more troubling were reports of potentially deliberate attempts to obscure evidence, including the airing out of the hire car, the use of air fresheners, and conflicting explanations for missing or unexamined items such as the kit bag. The initial searches focused almost exclusively on finding a living child, leaving luggage, vehicles, and enclosed areas unchecked during the critical early hours. These oversights provided opportunities for crucial evidence to be lost. Taken together, these factors suggest the disturbing possibility that the truth of what happened to Madeleine was not only difficult to uncover, but may also have been actively obscured. Was this simply a series of catastrophic investigative errors, or did some individuals deliberately steer attention away from vital leads? Was the narrative of an external abduction allowed to dominate to avoid closer scrutiny of those nearest to Madeleine? Despite years of investigations, reports, and documentaries, the same troubling contradictions lie at the heart of the case. The exact truth of what happened that night in Praia da Luz may never be fully known, but the unresolved inconsistencies continue to cast a long shadow over everyone involved. Ultimately, the most haunting question remains: was this a case that could never be solved, or one that was never truly meant to be? And perhaps the most unsettling thought of all is not about who entered or left apartment 5A that night, but about what may already have been present within it. What do you think about these contradictions and unanswered questions? Do you feel the investigation ever had a fair chance of uncovering the truth? Or was it compromised from the very start? If you were in the shoes of those following this case, what would you do, and what steps do you believe should be taken now?